let's stand and pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, everywhere present and filling all things, treasure of blessings and giver of life, come and dwell within us, cleanse us of all stain, and save our soul by gracious name. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory to Jesus Christ. Okay, just some logistics. Again, if you guys can get together, maybe help Antonio stay warm. And the microphone has two settings on it. There's one for power. It's on the bottom. It's green. If it turns red, let me know right away because I've got to change the batteries. And there's an on switch at the top that should be in the green. Right? Our tech guy said that that's the way it goes. So make sure it's on. And we'll just hand this off to the illustrious Steve. Nicholas, you want to join the rest? And because what we're going to do is with questions, we're going to pass the microphone around. Oh, okay. Okay, all right. We left off in chapter 5, which had to do with Belshazzar, who really was oblivious to what was going on. Lavished Daniel with all kinds of gifts. And then that night he died and his kingdom was taken over. And that ends chapter 5. And now we're going to go into chapter 6. Does anybody have any questions before we move
Yes,
on?
I do, Deacon James. Seems to me those chapters, and of course you mentioned on the altar today, the phrase "the Son of Man" comes up all the time now in the Bible. I thought they were always referring to Christ at one time, the Son of Man, but it seems like it's been given to a lot of different people.
It can refer to actual people. For the Christians, and definitely in the New Testament, it has to do with Jesus as the Son of Man. And so it can be taken either way. It depends on the context and who's translating and things like that.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it can have that other meaning, but not usually, but it can. So, Any other questions, comments, complaints? All right. Chapter 6. Okay, Darius is the ruler. He established about 120 satraps, and these are just provisional areas. These are little groups or regions in the country, in his kingdom. And he appointed 3 presidents, or called ministers, to oversee these satraps, with Daniel being one of them. He was, again, he's been shown favor in the court by these various kings. And so he becomes a president or minister. It's not sure how he got in these good graces with all these kings, but it happened. Then the satraps reported to the ministers. So there's 120 satraps and 3 ministers. Okay. Now Daniel was very good at what he did, and he was not corrupt, and he did his job very well. And the other satraps and presidents were going to conspire against him because they didn't like this. They didn't like him, And of course, him being one of the exiles and one of the, he's not one of them, that probably had something to do with it too. And at one point, the king wanted to appoint Daniel to be over the whole kingdom. So he wanted to appoint him over the whole kingdom, and that's what really drove him over the edge. So all these other people wanted to do in Daniel. And they couldn't bring him down on his performance because, like I said, he was very good at his job, so they couldn't do that. And so they resorted to Daniel's loyalty to the Most High God and to use this for, they were going to use his loyalty to the Most High God. The Most High God is who? God. Israel's God. Okay? Yeah. Well, there's other gods in play here, but the Most High God was Israel's God, and that's Daniel's God.
And Israel always referred to God as Spirit. Is that correct?
They use the term Most High God too.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
But they
That's
say
weird.
He is Spirit,
I think so, yeah. But in Daniel, it's always, well, not always, but mostly it's Most High God. They were going to use a violation of a law that was promulgated by the Medes and the Persians, a law that's going to trap Daniel because of his loyalty. So they wanted the king to establish this law that anyone praying to anyone, divine or human, other than the king, should be thrown into the lion's den. Now this is be like over 30 days, they said, but I don't think they really kept count. You know, as soon as they find them praying to somebody else, I think they were going to go after them. But anyways, so if they made a law, they wanted the king to make a law that anyone praying to a divine or human other than the king, in other words, you're praying to anybody but the king, then you're going to be thrown into the lion's den. All right? And this is promoting what? Paganism. Okay. So again, the king didn't, even though who was Belshazzar, even though that he praised the Most High God, Israel's God, Daniel's God, he didn't really commit to that. It was more just rhetoric, just verbiage. He didn't really believe in that because his kingdom was still practicing paganism. And one thing to note is that this is a reference to the Medes and the Persians in Daniel. And this was kind of unusual because the Persians were actually in favor of the Israelites, so to speak, up to a point. Because who was it that freed the Israelites from their exile in Babylon? Who freed the exiles? Say again? Yeah, the Persian king, Cyrus. Cyrus, the Persian king, released the exiles in Babylon so that they can go home to the promised land. And so it was not only just the Israelites, but the Persians were, they allowed freedom of religious expression. It wasn't just the Israelites, but any faith they were amenable to. In other words, they would let the people practice that, as long as you didn't break their other laws. So, so it's kind of unusual to lump the Persians in with this law against Daniel. Well, against...
I have a question. The book of Daniel starts with the king taking 4 Israelis or 4 Jews to the palace or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Was the rest of all the Jews, or what I might call Israel, were they all taken to Babylon?
Yeah, they were all taken to Babylon. Well, I take that back. All the healthy ones were taken to Babylon.
Oh.
So if you were old, or if you were a baby, or a woman, sorry, Antonio, if you were a woman, then they wouldn't necessarily take you unless they had need for a woman servant in the home or something like that. But they usually took the men that were young and strong for the military, for any other kind of servitude, like farming or whatever they needed to do. So the thing with Daniel and the 3 others, or the 4 of them, was that they were taken to the court for assimilation. That isn't what they said it was for,
Right.
but that's what they did. They took the brightest and they would train these people, and they would see if they would acclimate to the laws and to the routine that the court would go through. And if they did, then they would keep them there, and that's what Daniel exceeded in that and excelled in that, and so they kept him to do that. The idea was that if you take the brightest people, and that's what they did, they took the brightest people because they would also train them in their whatever science and math they had, astrology. They would train them in that because if they got their hearts, then they would speak to the other people, and then everybody would fall in line. Leon, do you have a question?
Well, really, I was going to say because didn't they only take the elites because it would be too difficult transporting every male Israelite into Babylon?
Well, not necessarily. They would form a line just like in Egypt. They would form a line and just transport them off. They would just, and some would die in the transfer, sure. But they would take others, not just the elites. They would take others. Of course, they took the elites because they didn't want any uprising. They didn't want to leave them behind and start forming an army or whatever. So yeah, they would take them, but they would also take young men to their camp. Did that answer your question?
Well, it did. I do have another question though. In chapter 4 or chapter 5, 3 of the 4 were thrown into the fiery furnace and came out whole.
Those are Daniel's friends, yes.
Yeah, I didn't understand why Daniel wasn't thrown in, but
Well, because I think they just addressed the young ones to worship, to do the pagan worship. They
okay.
didn't address Daniel. That's coming up.
Okay. So, how much time has passed? I mean, as I read the chapter about the fiery furnace, I thought, you know, everybody really realized who was the true God after that. So now we're talking about throwing them to the lions. Did a significant amount of time pass?
Well, it depends on the circumstances. With the 3, that was one incident. But then when we get to the lions with Daniel, that's going to be a different incident.
Okay.
So there's something else that happened, transpired. So it's through time. I don't know exactly how long it is. The thing with the Bible, with most things, trying to track time is kind of difficult.
Okay.
You know, because they talk about this king and that king in this year, and it wasn't really that king. It was really somebody else, at least in the secular history books. So it's kind of hard to do that. And like I said in the beginning, was that we're looking at the message from day and not necessarily as a history book. But that would be a different event that is coming up, at least for Daniel now, that's going to be coming up. Antonio?
I would just like to address Leo's question that they did bring the other people along as well as the, because they needed more workers, like the pottery makers, the metal workers, people like that would help their city grow and things that they produce. And they actually had their own community, like their own little subdivision that they lived in. So they did bring a lot of people back with them.
Yeah, they would need to present some kind of order in the exile. So even though all the Israelites were all there, they just couldn't trust them to do the things that they were supposed to do. They had to have people that would enforce things, enforce the laws and that. So they would convert other people. This was the same thing that was done with the Nazis and the Jews. You know, they would take certain Jews that would do what they would said to do, so they could keep the other Jews in line. So it's a common tactic between the countries. So back to the conspirators. They worked on catching Daniel, worshiping the Most High. And at one point they did find Daniel praying, not once but 3 times a day. You know, and he did this, it was almost like he wanted to be caught, because he had an open window, I think it was definitely in front of a window, I think it was open, and he's praying, and he's facing where Jerusalem is. That was the standard practice. And so people could see him doing this, and he did it for 3 times. And it's interesting because when the Christians first started out, this praying for 3 times a day was what they adopted that too as they began in Christianity. They were doing it 3 days. It may be more. I don't know about them. I know they do certain times a day. Yeah.
Wasn't this being adopted by Muslims since they pray 5 times a day and face Mecca?
Yeah, we think so. That's what Steve was talking about. They picked up on that too, I think, I guess.
That's what the Melkite pretend, but they got a lot from that. Their branch of and the West still does have a tradition, not everybody does it, of 3 times a day praying the Angelus, morning and night, 6
Yeah.
hours.
We have it in Byzantine that, it's preferred that you pray 3 times a day. You actually pray more than that. You can pray like somewhere between 5 and 7. If you include all the compliments. Well, there's morning prayers, there's evening prayers, there's noontime. There's also the hours. You have the 3rd hour, the 1st hour, 3rd hour, 6th hour, 9th hour, and then you got matins. You got vespers. You can pray vespers at home on your own. And I believe we have it in Chasisla, in the Book of Hours, in the Black Book, has these prayers in there, plus other prayers. So I mean, you can pray all day. you know, you can, like St. Paul said, pray unceasingly. It's doable. So, but I think it started off with 3 in the beginning of Christianity. Quickly it changed because Paul was right after. So I think things changed after that. Plus you got the monks in the desert, St. Anthony and the others, various monks from the Eastern Church. That would, you know, that's what they did. They prayed all day, the Psalms and other things. So. And so we just covered St. Paul said about praying unceasingly. So the conspirators were successful, and they pressured Darius. Okay, Daniel was out in front of the window, and these people that wanted to catch him caught him. So they caught him praying to the Most High God. But Darius didn't really want to punish Daniel because, you know, he had done good things for the king, you know, in the dreams and things like that. But he was pressured into this by the people. And if he didn't do this, then the people might have taken their revenge out on him. So they wanted him to pronounce judgment on Daniel. And so Daniel was placed in the lion's den. So this was, again, because he didn't pray. So it's because of that particular reason. And he was thrown in the lion's den. Let's see. They put him in the den. They rolled a stone, I think, in front of the entrance, and it was sealed with the king's mark, the signet, I think they call it. And then the next morning, you know, he was put in there, you know, during the day or the evening. Then nighttime went, and the next morning Darius went to look and see if he was alive. And he was. He found Daniel alive and unharmed by the lions. Which is interesting because I think in the book they talk about how they starved the lions. You know, they really wanted the lions to do this. You know, you guys aren't getting any food till a week from Tuesday. You know, and then they throw Daniel in. Here's your food. Let's see. I have a mark here to read chapter 6, verse 20. Let's see. When he came near the den where Daniel was, he cried out anxiously to Daniel. So Darius really is, you know, kind of in favor of Daniel. You know, he's, you know, or maybe he just bows to the pressure at the moment. You know, it's hard to tell. Oh, Daniel, so Darius says, oh, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you faithfully serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? So he was looking to see if he was going to be saved by the king. Now, at this point, you have to start wondering, why does he care? Because he's not going to convert the people. You know, they've been through this several times now in these other chapters with the other kings. And they keep coming to say, okay, we worship the Most High God, and then they fall back on their old ways of paganism. So, but anyways, that's what he did. And an angel came to help Daniel. Now, does that sound familiar? Did this happen previously?
It happened with the 3 youths.
The 3 youths. You know, they talk about a 4th person being in there. It's like, we only threw 3 in there. How come we got 4? You know, well, that was the angel that helped them and preserved them so they didn't suffer. And then Daniel replied to Darius, and I think we were looking at 21 and 22. Let's see. Daniel then said to the king, "O king, live forever." You know, and of course this is, you know, an acclamation about living forever in this world. You know, he's not proclaiming him a god. You know, it's just like, go ahead and live forever in this world. You know, it's not going to happen, but go ahead, give it a shot. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth so that they would not hurt me. So the angel took care of Daniel like he took care of the 3 youths. Because I was found blameless before him and also before you, O king. I have done no wrong. So this is like, you know, what they did with the witches in Salem. You know, they throw them in the water, and if they survive, then they're telling the truth. If they die, it's like, oh, well, I guess they lied. You know, so it's a similar thing here. If Daniel survives, then he must be telling the truth. And now he's proclaimed this truth, not only to the king, but all the other people are going to know about this. Now by Daniel's willingness to enter the lion's den showed his trust in the Most High God. Okay? That was, he showed his faith to God. And God intervened because of this trust. So, and we know that God has come and intervened throughout time with mankind to primarily keep his plan going of salvation. And Daniel says that he was found innocent, like we read, not only before God, but also before the king. Quite a bold statement for a non-Persian, okay? Remember, he's in exile. And every chance they get, the people or the satraps or the presidents, every chance they get, it's like, oh, you remember Daniel, the exile, you know, and they're keeping that up in the forefront, and he's not one of them, okay? So, let's see here. Let's say as a result of the miracle that saved Daniel, Darius put the conspirators and their families in the den, which were immediately killed by the lions. Okay, so people that lied or were, promoting falsehood, so to speak, were put in the lion's den. And so this is going to happen again. There's going to be another time or two that this happens.
I think they put them in with their wives and children and everybody.
Yeah, they put the whole family in. The husband, the wife, the kids, the baby, the dog, they threw everybody into the den because they were all responsible for this. And they were killed by the lions. And now they hadn't eaten it for at least 2 days. So Darius saw the wonders of the Most High God. Does that sound familiar? And proclaimed that the God of Daniel be worshipped. Again. All right, now we come to where the king says that we're going to worship the Most High God. At this point, we have 2 kings. We now have Nebuchadnezzar and Darius recognizing the Most High God as the one true God. But of course, that all changed later when something else happened. So, and they never really pushed the people to change their faith and have this one faith. Okay, and that does happen. That does happen with certain kings. We have Vladimir, Prince Vladimir with the Russians. He wanted all his people to have one faith. And that's how it came to be the Byzantine faith. Okay? That's in the story for another day. But it does happen where the king can and will look for a faith for his people, for his whole kingdom. That brings us to the end of chapter 6. And this is the end of the narrations or the stories. Okay, now we're going to move into chapters 7 through 12. Well, these have to do with visions and interpretations of the visions, of Daniel's visions now. Before, in the stories, most of the visions had to do with the king. Now, Daniel did have help from the angels and things like that, but the visions and the dreams were usually of the kings, and he was brought in as an interpreter. Now these are going to be Daniel's visions and interpretations. And these are going to be concerning the coming of the kingdom and the end times. And this is why I asked Father if we can do this now, because we're coming on to the salvation with Christ's crucifixion and resurrection and his ascension into heaven, the salvation that we have, and about his kingdom and about the end times in his kingdom. So that's why this is important, because it's very much related to what's going to be happening soon with the great fast and at the end. We finished chapters 1 through 6. We have any questions? Comments? Let's go for complaints. Any complaints? Okay, that's good. Chapters 7 through 12 contain Daniel's visions and revelations. The visions come to an end with the persecution of Antiochus IV, and I'm sure I'm going to pronounce this wrong. I looked it up and I forgot it already. Epiphanes, or Epiphanes. It's spelled like Epiphany, only instead of a Y, there's an ES at the end of it. And there's a reason for that, which I think I get to later on. So that's where the conclusion of 7 through 12 comes with the death of Antiochus IV. And he was the one who defied the temple in Jerusalem with the pagan gods. He set up a pagan god. I think one was Zeus. I think there was another Baal maybe. I can't remember now. But he did defile the temple, and he erected pagan gods in the Jerusalem temple. Most scholars look at the writings of the visions being completed before 164 BC. And the reason for this is is that the death of Antiochus. That's actually the death when he died was in 164. So that's why they think that these visions and everything were written before 164. And so that's one of the reasons why it wasn't included in the Book of the Prophets, because the Book of the Prophets has already been done, closed out. And so, and that's why we see things that are related to the 2nd century, but we also see things back from the 6th and 5th century, which we talked about with Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian exile. That was all 5th century. And so the story goes back in that place, but then people are brought up like Antiochus, which are more 2nd century. So that's why the story mainly is in the 5th century, with the writings being completed roughly in the 2nd century. And so at that time we had the death of Antiochus, and when the temple was restored, and the temple was restored in purity usually, by the Maccabees. And you can read about that in the Maccabees.
The book of Daniel starts with the king, it said, taking, can't remember the term, taking objects from the temple.
Right.
So the king took a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, we talked about that when he had this, when one of the kings had this big banquet and he brought out the vessels.
Yeah. So but the temple in Jerusalem still stood and still had.
Yeah, there was still parts of it still there. It hadn't been destroyed yet. But this time we're erecting pagan gods. We're erecting the statues of pagan gods in the temple. It's not about taking the vessels out or anything. That was one event. Now we're actually putting pagan gods into the temple in Jerusalem.
Okay.
So that's a big sacrilege. Yeah, that's a big no-no. And so that's what he was very cruel. Antiochus was very cruel, even in the secular history. It seems like. Who was very cruel? Antiochus the Fourth. So, I mean, we're going to get to it, but he even killed 3 of his predecessors so that he can be king. So he's killing his own people so he can be king. So he was pretty nasty. Yeah.
And real quick,
Well, you want to come up here so we can get the question on the... Come on up. Join us. We won't bite. We promise.
and real quick, I know that Bible, the temple, or something like that, they all suffered some horrible fate, or something happened to their kingdoms, like Antiochus. It's like eventually, Seleucid Empire was pretty much absorbed by the Romans, and the Roman general Pompey entered the temple. He lost the civil war soon after the Caesar, right? And the Babylonians were destroyed by the Persians, right?
Okay.
Is that just like things happening, or do you think it had something to do with the fact that they all did destroy the temple?
Well, you're talking about the secular history. You're not talking about the stuff that's in the Bible, at least not all of it. So, like I said, we can't take the Bible as a history book, because, like I said, we're talking about how Daniel's book was actually put in the setting of the 6th century, when he actually wrote it, or whoever it was, wrote it more in the 2nd century, or the 3rd, 4th. So that was after. And so that's why you get to see things from the 2nd century, because that's when it was written. So, but he put it, everybody knew what happened with the Babylonians and the captivity back in the 6th and 5th century, because the books have been written. Also, the people would talk about this. This wasn't something that was kept on the QT. I mean, they would talk to each other, and the word would spread. So people knew what was going on. So, but with the Bible, we can't take it as a history book. It doesn't really correlate. So especially with Daniel, because there's so much difference between when he wrote and what he's writing. Okay. So, temple was restored in purity in reference to and you can reference that in the Maccabees, roughly chapter 6 and 9. During the time of the Maccabees, it was a very violent period. The Maccabees were revolutionaries. They wanted to get rid of whoever was dominating them, Darius, the Romans, whoever at the time was, they were fighting anybody that was in their land at this point, because they were back and they were released. The visions have to do with these times, with these violent times, but at the same time, Daniel's work is considered apocalyptic, which has to do with what? The end times. And we're talking about God's plan, his secret plans for victory over this world, and the establishment of his kingdom. So that's the apocalyptic thing, and that's what Daniel's talking about. And that's why, again, why I asked Father to do this now, because part of this apocalyptic, this end times, has to do with our salvation through Jesus Christ, through his resurrection, his death and resurrection. Okay, so that's all connected. It's all part of the plan. And what makes Daniel's prophecy different, prophecies different from other prophets are the following. Making a famous person from the past the receiver and transmitter of revelation. In this case, Daniel. Remember, the author could have chosen the name Daniel from past Daniels, for example, from the 14th century BC, and from those documents, and there was others. There was also a Daniel, the son of David, we see in 1 Chronicles. The second thing is that going back to the source of evil in this world and displaying it schematically, for example, the 4 empires. So Daniel did this. He revealed these other empires, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, etc. So, and he talked about the fall of these empires. The third reason for about Daniel has to do with the prophecy of the end of the world and the time with the establishment of God's kingdom. Again, this has to do with the plan, God's plan, and that Daniel plays a big role in this. And we know that Jesus actually quoted Daniel quite a few times during his life here. Daniel also talks about the resurrection of the dead. And I believe Daniel is the first one that does this. Talks about the resurrection of the dead. Even the Sadducees, I believe it's the Sadducees didn't believe this. Okay, the Pharisees did, but the Sadducees didn't.
When did he do that?
Oh, we'll get to it.
Sorry?
We'll get to it.
Oh,
Yeah. This is kind of a background thing we're doing now. So we're not in any particular chapter. Daniel's visions overlap each other. The 4 visions, we're going to have 4 visions in this section, correlate with the first part of the book of Daniel with the 4 major kingdoms. There's Belshazzar, which is Babylonian, chapter 7. Chapter 8 starts with Belshazzar, moving on to Antiochus. And then we move on to Darius the Mede. And then in chapter 9, that's chapter 9 with Darius. And then Cyrus and his reign is in chapter 10. So we're going to go through these kings again, only with visions from Daniel and not from the kings. Okay. Chapter 7. This is the first apocalyptic vision of the 4 beasts. So in Daniel's dreams of the 4 beasts arising out of the sea. Whenever there's some kind of chaos or problem or anything like that, a lot of times in the Bible they refer to the sea. They'll even talk about the chaos in the sea. The sea was unknown at that time. You know, of course they could sail on ships. They didn't know what was down in the water, what lurked down there. So the sea was always a reference or used to demonstrate chaos in the world or war or problems. And if we look at chapter 7, verse 2, I, Daniel, saw in my vision by night the 4 winds of heaven stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came out of the sea, different from one another. So, a lot of information here. We saw the 4 winds. Whenever we talk about the 4 winds, what does that mean? Anybody know? The whole world. The compass, the 4 directions on the compass, the 4 winds refer to the whole world. You know, there was other parts of the world and probably people there, but from their point of view, that was the world. That's what they knew. So this includes the whole world. And again, these winds were stirring up the Great Sea. The Great Sea is usually the Mediterranean. But again, they're talking about water as a symbol for chaos. And the 4 great beasts came out of the sea. Golly gee. So there you go. You have the 4 beasts that are coming out of the sea, the water of chaos. And they were all different from one another. So this is part of the vision that Daniel is having. So now when we get to the 4 beasts, we have the lion. And the lion has wings, and that symbolizes Babylon. And if you go to the history books, in the real history books, I think that was a symbol for Babylon as well. You know, the lion with the wings. So that one was, correlates, if it matters. It doesn't, but. The second beast is a bear with tusk in his teeth. And that represents the Medes. The leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads is Persia. Okay. And then the fourth beast was with iron teeth and 10 horns. You know, each one represented a king. And this is representative of Greece. So the Great Sea, usually the Mediterranean Sea. Sea represents chaos, like I said, with the beast. And we also see this kind of jargon in the Old Testament, for example, in Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1, Job chapter 9. The beasts correlate with Daniel's recollection, or Daniel's writings about Babylon, Medes, Persia, and Greece in chapter 2. If you remember, we talked about the statue and all these countries that are represented. So it's continuing on with that motif, so to speak. It's continuing on with roughly the same countries, kingdoms. The lion, a hybrid representing Babylon, was common in those days. So you had these hybrid animals, or even with people involved as a hybrid. That was common literature in those days. The plucked wings of this lion signifies the loss of power. Okay. And changed to human with human mind refers to the previous form of an ox, and now with sanity. So what are we talking about here? Remember the ox and the king, and the one that had to feed in the grass, you know, and the dew coming down on him, things like that. We're talking about Nebuchadnezzar here back in chapter 4. So he correlates with what was written before. So the bear, or the Medes, may be a reference to Jeremiah, because Jeremiah talked about a bear in chapter 51. And this is where the Medes were sent to destroy the Babylonians, represented by the lion. And the bear of the Media, as in the kingdom, is a symbol of their strength. And so you got another kingdom taking over one kingdom taking over another kingdom. So the Medes took over the Babylonians. Persia is represented by the leopard with 4 heads. The 4 heads may be a reference to that shows up later, which is when we will talk about it in Daniel in chapter 11. So we're going to talk about the 4 heads and what that means in chapter 11. Now Greece is the 4th beast, and it had 10 horns. But the type of beast is not given, just that it was different from the others. And possibly an elephant, thus the term stamping, like in the elephants coming in, like with Hannibal and the elephants. At this time, with Greece and others, you know, the elephants were used a lot in wartime. So that's what that may be referencing. And you can also see that kind of reference in Maccabees, the first book of Maccabees. Now, this Greece is the Seleucid kingdom, founded by Seleucus the First, which was Alexander's general. And this was originating in Syria. That's another reason for it being different from the others, because it was a different kingdom now. The 10 horns represent the kings of the Seleucid Empire, from Seleucus the first up to Antiochus the fourth. Now it talks about the removal of 3 horns, and this is symbolic of Antiochus' climb to the throne by killing 3 predecessors, 3 kings, the 3 potential kings, thus the emergence of the little horn. So you had the little horn, you had the 10 horns, the little horn comes up, displaces or knocks out the 3 big horns, and that's Antiochus coming to power. Okay, that's what that symbolizes. Okay, now, chapter 7, 9 through 14. This has to do with the heavenly throne room. The little horn with eyes speaks blasphemy. I remember what I said about Antiochus. He was very cruel and nasty, very paganistic, but very much wanted, to run things, be in control, be the boss, be the king. Now Daniel sees a room being set up for the coming judgment by God. Thus we have the multiple thrones, probably representing the 12 tribes, which does sound familiar. You talk about Matthew chapter 19, I believe. Think in Revelation, they talk about the 12 tribes being present in the kingdom, in the judgment room. Let's look at Daniel chapter 7, 9 to 10. As I watched, thrones were set in place, and an ancient one took his throne. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and flowed out from his presence. Thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood attending him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I'm going to find my water. I'll be right back. So think about that, the 9 and 10, and see what that does for you. What do you recall? Okay, going back to verse 9. As I watched, the thrones were set in place, and we already talked about thrones, multiple thrones, possibly of, the 12 tribes of Israel. And an ancient one took his throne. The ancient one refers to God. So God is the ancient one that comes in. Part of the reason that comes, they say that, is that his clothing was white as snow. Okay? Remember the transfiguration of Jesus? In the transfiguration of Jesus, everything was like white, like snow. And the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Fiery flames usually refers to a judgment of some sorts. And also, and its wheels were burning fire. So there's wheels on this throne. What does that remind you of? Another prophet. We talked about last time. Ezekiel? Yeah, with the fiery chariot, with the chariot, the wheels of fire and things like that. The stream of fire had issued and flowed out from his presence. 1,000 served him, and 10,000 times stood attending him, which is basically all the host of heaven. There's all the people, all the angels and saints that are attending to God and worshiping God. The court sat in judgment. So it comes right out and says that this is a judgment room, that there's going to be judgment. And what is it going to be a judgment about? Our deeds, or their deeds in this case. And the books were open. When the books are open, that means judgment is coming. When it's closed, that means that's it. Okay, the beast that has the 10 horns is destroyed by the others. Is destroyed, but the others are allowed to live for a while, but they lost their kingdoms. So again, this has to do, if we go back to the first 6 chapters, it talks about how we have these 4 kingdoms and they're going to disappear, they're going to go away because they've gone against God. So now let's look at verse 13. This is, I think, Steve's favorite one. As I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. So a human being, in another translation, is Son of Man. So, but it talks about coming with the clouds of heaven. What does that sound like? Anybody have any idea where that comes again? Singer?
Second coming?
Yeah, Revelation. in Revelation talks about Jesus coming on a cloud. Okay? So the human being that's referenced here, the version they have in Aramaic says, one like the Son of Man. So even though it could refer to the human beings, it's probably more about Jesus and him coming at the second coming. He's coming to make the judgment. That's what a lot of this is. They're talking about a judgment room. We got the 12 tribes there. We got God there. And Jesus is coming to God. That's what it says. And he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. So, and he's going to come and sit there with God and have the judgment. Okay, so this is very important because stuff like this wasn't in the Old Testament. This is, I think, the first time that we have so much. I mean, some of the other, like Jeremiah and Ezekiel, they have references to it. But this is very direct, so to speak, and very descriptive. And it relates to New Testament passages. And so Daniel is very important in talking about the end times. And that's why I bring this up at the Great Fast, because again, we have Christ at the end of the fast going to be sacrificing himself for that salvation, for that for the judgment day, for us to be saved and so that we can be in the kingdom with him. I guess it's in Revelation chapter 14 about him coming on a cloud. Now, in Aramaic, when they talk about the Ancient One, it translates to the Ancient of Days, which usually refers to the second coming. And again, that's another translation. So, but in any event, it all points to an apocalyptic event. And then we have in verse 14 indicates that the Messiah being given dominion. Notice I already switched to the word Messiah. We're talking about, even though Jesus wasn't around and they didn't talk about Jesus, and this is starting to look like Daniel's talking about Jesus, the Son of Man. Being given dominion over everything, and his kingdom will not be destroyed. Does that sound familiar? No? Very familiar, right? And again, this is another important reference for a prophecy we're going to see in chapter 12. So the verbiage here with Son of Man and coming with the clouds indicates a man that was brought about by God, and all will serve him as in judgment will be handed down. So it's all about the judgment room and the last days. So, now we pick up in chapter 15, where this is the interpretation that's given to Daniel. So now Daniel was doing the interpreting of the dreams of the kings and so on. Now he's having the dreams, and now he's been given interpretation. And from verse 15 to the end of chapter 7, Daniel's vision is interpreted. Some say that besides wisdom and understanding given to Daniel by God, he also has help through God's messengers, such as Gabriel. So the angels have been sent by God to Daniel to help him interpret his dreams and his visions. So it's a little bit of shift here. And I'm sorry about my throat. And it's not, and so it's kind of a continuation of the first part with the narrations and the stories in chapters 1 through 6. So it's kind of repeating the same story, so to speak, but a little different angle to it. But this whole point of Daniel is talking about the judgment and about the resurrection, about our salvation and the second coming and the kingdom of God. So it's a message that God is trying to get across to everybody. Daniel then asked about the four beasts, to Gabriel, and especially about the one that was different than the others. The angel told Daniel that the four beasts will be four kings. That is the ones that we talked about earlier: Babylon, Mede, Persia, and Greece. For now, let's look at the different one, and let's look at verses 23 and 24, I think. And this is what he said as for the fourth beast. There shall be a fourth kingdom on earth that shall be different from all the other kingdoms. It shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it to pieces. So, we're talking about a dictator, somebody that's going to drive the earth to its ruin. Now, as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise. And that's what we're talking about, the Seleucid Empire up to Antiochus. And another shall arise after them. This one shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. We already know who put down the 3 kings. It's Antiochus. So he's the one that's really going to be the nasty king, and the one that's going to do all kind of damage. And like I said before, Antiochus done away with 3 of his predecessors, and is the great blasphemer, because he set up pagan gods in the temple, and then persecutor of the Jews. He persecuted the Jews. He killed a lot of Jews. And he did this for like 3.5 years. And so then if we look at 26 and 27, then the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away to be consumed and totally destroyed. And so then this is the court of the Most High. Okay. The kingship and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the holy ones of the Most High God. The holy ones of the Most High God. In other words, God's kingdom is going to reign, and everything else is going to go away. He's going to have it, it'll be destroyed. And this is, apocalyptic. This is coming towards the end of what's going to happen. Now, this is Old Testament. This is a long time ago. That doesn't mean that it's not, it doesn't have any relevance now. It does. Because it doesn't matter whether, we had 4 kingdoms here. And they all came and went, and they were all powerful, and they all worshipped the Most High, and then they went against it. The same thing can happen with the countries that we have now, or whenever the second coming is. When that happens, whatever countries are there are not going to be there. That's the point here. That's why we can't really use this as a history book, because obviously we're talking about people that have come and gone. And that's not the point. The point is the apocalyptic period when we had the ending, when the judgment is going to come, that this is all going to happen. It's not going to happen to the Persians or the Greeks. It's going to happen to whoever's in charge at that time, whatever kingdoms there are on earth. And that's what Daniel's trying to get the point across, so that we can prepare. So this is giving us a heads up so that in the life that we have right now, we can live for God and worship God to be able to be in his kingdom, because his is the one that's going to come. And this is what Daniel's saying. This is the one that's going to come forever. So the 4th beast, the strongest of all others. Okay, Antiochus was ruthless. He would kill a lot of people, and he was the strongest of all the others. He will fall, and the everlasting kingdom is established. Thus the second coming. So, and that's the end of chapter 7. And since my throat has obviously gone south for the winter, we'll call this, this might be a good time to stop. Oh, it's time anyways. So it's a good indicator. I hope it doesn't happen next time.
So we finished chapter
7.
Okay,
7. So next time, let's look at 8 and 9. And read 8 and 9 if you want to take a look at 10, because like I said, if, sometimes we'll keep going. We'll keep going if the hour isn't up, so that, we can get, if we get ahead, then the next time we might get behind. You know how that works. So read 8 and 9 and 10 if you have the time. Any questions? Comments?
Thank you.
Complaint? Oh, we'll just skip over the complaints then. Thank you. Well, thanks for coming. I appreciate it. You guys have a good week. God bless. Yeah. Yeah.